Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Hope you've had a great Thursday. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi, right here in Walterboro, South Carolina. Day 14 of the Alec Murdaugh double murder trial in the books. Not as exciting as yesterday, I have to say, with the bomb scare and all that jazz, but still a little bit of drama in the courtroom, and we'll get to that in just a second. Real quick, I have to thank Jackie, Ann, Terry, Shane, Barbara, and Tori for your donations. Appreciate you guys so much. And I had the pleasure of spending my lunch hour on the live Q&A with Mr. Joe McCullough, who is Connor Cook's attorney in the boat crash case. I'm telling you, this guy's like the most popular guy in the courtroom. Everybody knows him. He's always in a pleasant mood. He's hilarious, and he knows his stuff. So if you didn't catch that at lunch, a lot of people have asked where to find it. So just go to Law and Crime's YouTube, pull up today's testimony, and when you see it goes to lunch, we're on not too long after that. That's where you find all the Q&As. Also, big thank you to Surviving the Survivor podcast for having me on last night. I had the absolute honor of being on with one of my favorite true crime people in the whole wide world, Mr. Joseph Scott Morgan, the smartest forensics guy I know. And actually, he was on the phone yesterday during the bomb scare where he was supposed to call in and talk about gunshot residue. And then he was able to pull in being in Atlanta when the Rudolph bombing, the Olympic bombing, and the abortion clinic bombing happened. So I got to hang out twice with him yesterday. Lucky me. Music fact of the day: the cover album for the Eagles, Hotel California, almost got the band sued. So the picture was taken with a cherry picker 60 feet above Sunset Boulevard. And the Beverly Hills Hotel was almost unrecognizable because of the angle of it. And also it was at sunset, so it was a little obscured. There's like the trees in the front. And so it was almost unrecognizable. But when they recognized that that was their hotel, they threatened to sue, but they didn't, because now it's like an icon, right? So, man, okay, we got a roadmap now, finally, for when this thing might be starting to take a turn for like the downside closings and all that. So Harpootlian asked the state for a little bit of a timeline of when they expect to close their case or rest their case. And they have several witnesses that are coming from out of state. They're experts. They are super expensive people, and they've got to make travel arrangements for them to get here. So the state says they expect to rest their case by the middle of next week, hopefully. The defense is planning on taking, he said, at least a week. So 2 weeks from now, we very well could be getting near closings and getting this baby wrapped up. It's going to be quite the deliberations. I think we're all going to be pacing there on the sidewalk. So another little thing that came up after the afternoon break, the defense attorney, Mr. Barber, wanted to have the judge exclude testimony from Mallory Beach's attorney, Mark Tinsley, who was the last witness of the day, by the way. He said that Mr. Tinsley was the first contributor to a GoFundMe for the other witness in the case, Miss Shelley Smith, who was the caretaker of Miss Libby Murdaugh. It was a GoFundMe set up by her daughter after her testimony, where she said she wanted to reward her mother's bravery. Now, we know her testimony, as well as the data taken from the car, really busted the time frame Alec gave of how long he was at his mom's house. But Mr. Barber said he made a financial payment to a witness in the middle of a trial that has a financial interest in the outcome. Miss Shelley is still under subpoena, and the GoFundMe, I checked, has raised a little over $11,000 as of now. And Barber says he cannot find one example where a witness for the state gives another witness for the state money for her honesty. So Newman cracks me up. He says he's not going to strike testimony, but he said that will make good fodder for cross-exam, and indeed it will. So yesterday, if you remember, we left off with the FBI agent who was part of the team that examined the electronics in Alec's car. And so just a really quick cross exam. By the way, packed house again this morning, pretty crowded this afternoon. And people have asked me if I'm coming, if I want to come, how early do I need to get in line? I really don't know. I do know that we go live around 8:30 sometimes, and people are already in line. So I always tell people, just to be safe, I get there by 8. As people leave, they do let other people come in, but yeah, it's becoming the place to be right now in Walterboro. So back to the witness cross-exam. He talks about it was just difficult, as we know from testimony yesterday, to download this data. The encryption was done by the manufacturer, not Alec. And so they had to reverse engineer, as we know, to get the data. They got an exact model of the car, tried to extract data from that to make sure that they were doing it correctly with Alec's car. I think they ended up and had to create some things to use in this case. And they were asked, why did you not reach out to the manufacturer? And the witness said they like to get data themselves. And also they can find information that most manufacturers cannot. But he also said yesterday that for the most part, manufacturers tend not to get involved in stuff like this, or they're not cooperative. So the only iPhone that connected that day in that car was Alec's. And so they talk about Bluetooth connecting automatically. Yes, it does. And then there was just limited location data and none for the 7th, which stinks, but it is what it is. So yeah, I mean, it took a year for them to get all this stuff off that car. So Chris Wilson, now, if you've been following this and following the podcast, following the trial since the beginning, this is kind of like a time warp that we're stuck in, because the rest of the day's witnesses we have seen testify, the jury has not, but we're redoing it because Judge Newman is allowing the financial crimes in just because it's part of the state's motive, right? So he's with the Wilson Law Group. And I don't really want to regurgitate a lot of what you can find on a previous episode, but just to go back through, he identifies Alec as the redhead with glasses, and they've known each other since high school. They had mutual friends. One summer, they played on the same ball team. They reconnected when they were in college or law school and got closer. So Mr. Wilson moved to my neck of the woods, Greenville, for a while. And then when he came back down, they just reconnected. And he talked about loving both sides of Maggie and Alec's family. Sounds like they, just were part of each other's families, which is good if you have a friend like that. It's just not good if you treat that friend like Alec treated him in the end. But hey, he's not on trial for being a bad friend, right? So he said they would talk on the phone sometimes multiple times a day about everything. And so when asked if he had worked with Alec, he said, sometimes in the early days, especially when there were some really big cases that they weren't equipped to handle, they would call other lawyers. And so he did use Alec. He said about 30 times over the years. And so he also talks about contingency. And so the cases were a contingency. And that's where the fee, the attorney and the client agree on at the beginning, and there's no retainer fee. So you receive 1/3 to 40% of the settlement that the client receives. And yeah, I'm in the wrong business, y'all. I need a time warp to go back to like law school or medical school. No, I wouldn't want to be a lawyer. I really wouldn't, because for a million reasons. Love lawyers, but wouldn't want to be one. So they also explained that the fees for expert witnesses, travel that they may need to come testify, all that's paid separate from the contingency fees. So if he were working on a case with Alec, they would agree in the beginning of the fee, and you would get the client approval, but typically it was a 50-50 split. And so we know how they explained that attorney fees are sent to the firm and not the client or not the attorney, because as Ms. Seckinger said, it's stealing. That's the word of the day, y'all, stealing. Let's not do it. So he explains that Vicky is who helps him with the disbursements. So again, we're talking about this Mack truck case. That's where the drive shaft fell off. A semi caused just a horrible crash with injuries. And so he called Alec for help with that case because he knew Alec was familiar with those kinds of lawsuits. There were actually two cases that they tried for that one accident. One was for the wife for the loss of services of spouse, and then one for the husband's personal injury. So they didn't answer to the wife's case, so that defaulted, but they did answer to the husband's case, and they agreed to try this in front of a judge and not a jury. But ultimately, Mac took liability, and Chris Wilson waived punitive damages as well as the right to appeal. That helped the money to disperse quicker. So the ultimate verdict for that was $5.5 million, with $4 million going to the husband, who unfortunately died 6 months after this, and then $1.5 million for the wife. Now, the week of the trial, Alec had spent a lot of time with this man's wife, just preparing for trial. And so he said the closings were done by Alec, and he got emotional in those closings. So ultimately, the attorney fees, Chris Wilson got $791,000 and Alec got $792,000. The $5.5 million was put in a trust, and the checks arrived the last few days of February of 2021. So Griffin stands up and is like, I object to this line of questioning, and the exhibit overruled. So there's a text from Alec where he said he needs to get the check today. If it's too much for you, I understand. Chris Wilson says, I'm working on it. Alec calls him his hero and talks about playing around a golf. But Mr. Wilson explains that any check has to be in trust 10 days before you disperse. And he wanted to wait to be sure nothing would come up before he cut those checks. And Alex said that, it was great news. The money is in when it was time to disperse. And Alec told him, as we know from him testifying, that he was going to put that money in an annuity. And the checks needed to be paid for him and not to the firm. Stealing. But he was worried about the boat case and the liability he may have in that. He said he had cleared this with his partners and the firm, and they would put the money on the books to show he had already been paid. So on March 10th, he tells Chris Wilson, I need to get these checks today. And Chris was on the road, and he said if he got back in time, he'd sign it and get it to him. And so Chris Wilson said he had no reason not to believe Alec about the annuities and clearing it with the firm. I mean, they're best friends, and, usually best friends don't lie to you like that. But so he wrote the checks for the husband's case and then a check for the woman's case. But on March 10th, 2021, the check he wrote Alec was voided and rewritten into two separate checks. And then so that was the $600,000 and then the $192,000 for the wife's case. So Alec had those checks picked up that day, and the checks were voided because when they talked, Alec said he was doing 3 separate annuities and needed 3 separate checks. So Mr. Wilson's firm recut the 2 checks, and that was $192,000 on March 10th of 21. That was payable to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, fees, and it was a Bank of America, and on the back it was for deposit only. March 10th, $225,000 for fees, and that was the first part of the $600,000. Then $375,000 same day, March 10th. That was the second part of the $600,000. The 2 checks made to the firm was for cost reimbursement for both those cases. And those both were $14,692, with one being 13 cents and one being 14 cents. But that's really what, got Miss Seckinger, got her ears up when all this mess happened that we heard about earlier this week. So Chris Wilson goes into the more personal side of their relationship, and he talks about their kids being close, their wives were close. And so conversations after the checks were cut, Alex said insurance companies were fighting the boat case. And he talked about how Alec had a big reputation. He thought Alec was one of the biggest producers in the firm, and he thought he did well financially. He would have never suspected any kind of money problems with him, and he didn't ask anything that raised red flags. So on May 19th of 2021, of course, we know the communication from Vicky from Chris Wilson's firm got an email from Alec's paralegal, Miss Annette, and saying, we've got cost checks, but where are the fee checks? And Vicky responded that Alec was paid in March for his fees. We know the fallout from that. But Vicky did not raise this issue with Chris Wilson. And so early June 2021, actually we go back, email May 27th from Miss Seckinger to Annette. She told Annette she's got expense checks and that Alec was due more money. So we know Vicky was on vacation. We've heard this, but on June 2nd, Annette emailed again, and Vicky said she didn't do bookkeeping and forwarded that email to Chris Wilson. So Chris Wilson talked to Lee Cope about the Mac case, and he asked if it had been dispersed. And Chris Wilson said there were outstanding fees. So after that email, Chris Wilson got in touch with Alec, and he said, I got this email. If there's more cost, just let me know. And he reminded Alec, this is the case you asked me to personally write the checks to you. So Alec said it was taken care of and he had talked to his partners. Now, the weekend before the murders, Chris and his wife saw Alec, Maggie, and Buster the weekend before I think they were at like a baseball tournament for the Gamecocks in Columbia. And he was really late getting home. But so at 9/11 on the night of the murders, Alec called him and said he must call everybody Bo, because Alec called and said, Bo, Chris Wilson said, can I call you right back? And Alec said, okay. He said Chris Wilson said he was messing with his pool pump and just, didn't have time to talk at the moment. So then 3 minutes later, he called Alec back and he said, Alec said, Bo, I'm about to get to mom's. Can we talk in a bit? And Chris Wilson said, sure. So Chris asked about his mom and dad. He knew and loved Alec's parents. And he knew from a conversation from that previous weekend that Mr. Randolph's condition had taken a turn for the worse. So Alec texted at 9:52, call me if you up. So Chris Wilson called him. The first call, there was no answer. And he said that's normal with Alec sometimes. 9:53, just a minute later, he called back. How's your mom? Alex said about normal. And they had a case where some kind of equipment malfunction. And Chris Wilson said they were going to lose their chance to inspect this equipment before they got rid of it. And Alex said, hey, look, I'm about to get home. Let's talk tomorrow. And so his wife stayed up that night. He went to bed. And then his phone, at this point, he's emotional on the stand. He heard his phone buzzing, but didn't pay it much attention. But his wife comes in and she's hysterical and told him to wake up. And it was Randy or his wife on the phone. He couldn't remember. But Chris had a text, give me a call. I need to tell you something before you hear it somewhere else. So his wife told him about the murders and he got dressed at 11 and said he had to go to Moselle. And he tried to call his kids, which, as we know, were very close. I think he indicated that his daughter and Paul were especially close too. But he went to Moselle. It takes about an hour and 40 minutes to get here to Columbia or whatever. So it took him a minute. And he got there around 1 a.m. and there were family and friends there, which, we've talked about as an active crime scene. People are just showing up and, and one thing too, that Joseph Scott Morgan said last night on the podcast was the first thing they should have done was taken Alec to headquarters and taken him in a room and talked to him. But, is that where the privilege comes in? We don't know. But he said, he went through the main gate. He saw activity at the kennels. John Marvin and Randy told him to go up to the main house. And he said he just hugged Alec and cried and he didn't know what to say. He said he stayed till around 5 a.m. and he said everybody was just shocked and destroyed. So he slept in his Bamberg office and went back to Moselle. And he didn't want to know what Alec found or have Alec describe anything to him. He said, 2 people I loved were gone. And he said, that's really all I needed to know. My heart really went out to Chris. He seems like a very sincere guy. He didn't know that there was an issue with fees. So going back to financial stuff, he didn't ask. And he called Alec more often to check on him more. Tried to get him out of the house, because really Chris Wilson was worried that Alec would kill himself. And the law partners had that concern too, and they wanted to be there for him. And I'm going to tell you, man, Buster looks really sad when Chris was on the stand talking about this. And I know Buster's been in the news the last couple of days, and I'm not going there, but I'm just saying that he looked sad. So anyways, around mid-July, there was a call about fees, and he said he messed up the annuities, and he would send the money back to Chris Wilson's office so they could rewrite the checks to the firm. And he sent $600,000 by two separate wires, July 15th or the 16th. One was Palmetto State Bank, that was $350,000, and then the Bank of America wire was $250,000. Now, we're short the $192,000. And Alex said he would put 192 he had put 192,000 in an annuity and couldn't access it, but he would get it to him shortly. He never did, by the way. He asked to email the office and let them know that the money was in the account. So Chris had to put $192,000 of his own daggum money in this trust account to cover the $192,000 that Alec did not send him. And he said, I can't tell someone I'm holding money if I'm not. So he put his own money in there. And Alec asked him to cover the $192,000, but Chris Wilson said he knew he had to, whether or not Alec asked him or not. So he sent an email to Alec, which we know he forwarded to staff at the firm. And that was on July 19th of 2021. And that was saying that Chris Wilson had that money in that trust. So September 3rd, we're jumping ahead here. Lee Cook called and said they discovered Alec stealing. So Chris talked to Alec at a convention in August in Hilton Head about the money. And he had begged Alec and Buster to come so they could golf. And he asked about repayment. And Alec said he was settling his dad's estate and would hopefully have it soon. So shortly after the end of August, Chris Wilson said, I need to come see you and talk about this money. I need to be repaid. Chris Wilson said, that's a lot of money. And here's the thing. The jurors are sort of intrigued with this financial testimony on one hand, because these figures being thrown out like they're nothing is probably more money than some of these people make in, decades. I mean, just, so I think there's that intrigue, but I also think that the financials have disgusted the jury in a way too, in that it's a pattern. He had no moral compass. It didn't matter if you were his best friend or the son of his housekeeper of 20 plus years, you were fair game if he could get some money from you. So, the jury, I think, is getting an overall picture, but I also think too, it's getting lost. The murders are getting way over here. And it seems like now today really felt like he was on trial for his finances. I know they can come in. I just kind of wish it were a little more condensed and pick a couple of witnesses. I think Tony Satterfield alone would have been enough. Powerful testimony, and we're about to get to that. But so ultimately, Chris goes to Alec's office and he says, look, if something happens to you, I know how probate works. I can't get repaid. So he had a handwritten statement by Alec. And ultimately, Chris was worried he was going to kill himself and he'd be out. And Alec wrote 3 sentences as a promissory note. And part of it read, this confirms Chris Wilson loaned me $192,000 in July of 2021. I hereby acknowledge I am the repayer of the loan within, I think it says 60 days. I think I need to get my eyeglasses prescription bumped up just a hair, y'all. So Lee Cope on September the 3rd, who's a partner at the firm, called and told him about the stealing money, just, the big deal. And so they wanted to meet the next day. Chris Wilson wanted to meet in person. He was shocked, mad, betrayed at Alex, Alec was non-committal about it though. So they send the jury out And it's just really quick. They talk about the drug issue because Chris Wilson's testimony is going to eventually go to Alec going to rehab, admitting the opioid addiction. And, if you remember in pretrial motions, the defense brought up the addiction a lot, but now they don't really want it coming in. So that was kind of confusing. But so finally, Chris Wilson tells his wife, there's a problem and that he was going to get to Beaufort. And he called many times and couldn't get Alec on the phone. So I believe this is the day of the roadside shooting, y'all. Alec called while driving and said, sorry, he didn't take his calls. He said he would meet him at his mom's around 11 a.m. So Chris Wilson got there first. He said they didn't talk in the driveway. They go kind of in the side door, end up on the front porch. And Chris Wilson said, Alec, what the heck is going on? I need to know if you've done something involving me. So Alec starts crying. He goes inside, gets a paper towel. He says, I'm sorry. I've been addicted to opioids for 20 years. And he said the conversation was heated at times, but he admitted stealing from the law firm and his clients. And Alec told him, I crapped you up. I try not to cuss on here because I know people say thank you because I have kids in the car. But he said, and he crapped a lot of people up, and I'm sorry about the $192,000. But more than the money, just the trust that you've had with this guy for how many decades, just gone. Over $192,000, really. And when you're wealthy, it's like $192,000 is that worth your friendship? But I think it shows where, I just want to know where the money, y'all. Look, I'm from the South. I know people that don't trust banks. They need to be looking in Uncle Eddie's backyard, because I bet you that's where the money is. I'm telling you, man, people know how to hide money here in the South. My grandma used to wrap it in tinfoil and put it in her freezer. So it looked like just a lamb chop, a big old steak or something. And it's really like a wad of cash. We used to laugh because the people that bought her house this is my great grandmother, after she died, we said they probably money all in those walls and the flooring, because she lived through the Great Depression. She didn't trust banks. So there you go. Chris Wilson asked Alec, how long has this been going on? And Alec said a long time, and that he had just been good at covering it up. So he doesn't remember how the conversation ended. He just said, I was angry, didn't know how to feel, drove back to Columbia. And he hasn't talked to Alec verbally since then, but he did get one or two texts from him. And one of the texts was on September 16th of 2022. It was a number that Chris had never seen before. And Alec said that he was on his way to rehab. So Chris responded the next day. He didn't say what he responded to, but he never got his money back from Alec. So we go to Cross on Moselle the 8th, because Chris Wilson went back that next day. He asked about talking to Alec about the fee issue. And he said the only conversation before the murders was with Lee Cope and not Alec. So he asked if all money was dispersed, and you said it had not. And no follow-up questions before the murders. And the defense says you had conversations with Alex after the email about being owed more costs. And Alex said, no, it's good. Chris Wilson asked the firm if he knew about disbursement, and he said yes. So, it's just a lot of the same. He said his thoughts were with him and Buster and the whole family. And they talk about him getting that promissory note. And Chris Wilson said, I knew enough about probate law to know that I needed that note. He said at the time he didn't have the money, and that Maggie's estate and Mr. Randolph's estate were tied up. Chris Wilson went to see Randolph after the murders, and he actually died the next day. So, we know that as a busy parent, you don't have time to completely overhaul your life in the new year. One change that's easy to make that will make your life easier in 2023 is Little Spoon. Most of the baby and kid foods at the grocery store is heavily processed and often on the shelf longer than your little one has been in this world. Not cool, and not the quality nutrition our kids deserve. Little Spoon makes everything fresh, organic, and uses absolutely nothing artificial. It's just like homemade, all delivered to your door and ready in seconds. From baby food to big kid, Little Spoon has you covered for years. Little Spoon even hides vegetables in chicken nuggets, mac and cheese, and more. Their smoothies come in pouches that make on-the-go snack easy, healthy, and tasty. And yes, I tried one. They're great. Did I mention it comes right to your door? It's flexible, easy, and everything stores in the refrigerator or freezer. You can pick your menu for a variety of foods to introduce to your child. The price is right, the quality is unmatched, so make this year's chaos a little more manageable with time-saving, delicious, and healthy meals and snacks your kids will love. Go to littlespoon.com and enter my code WhatTheWorld at checkout to get 50% off your first Little Spoon order. That's littlespoon.com and enter WhatTheWorld for 50% off at checkout. I love Thrive Market. I've been able to find brands not widely seen in stores that are much cheaper than other places online. I've been using their Foy CBD relief cream for my knee with amazing results. And this is just one example of the many products you can find to better your life, from foods to beauty to health. As a Thrive Market member, I can save money on every single order. And on average, I save 30%. On my last order, I saved $93. On top of the massive savings on each order, Thrive Market has a deals page that changes every day. It gives me cash back on many brands, and they have a price match guarantee. You can search dietary restriction using filters, and even better, they help a family in need with their 1-for-1 membership matching program. You join, they give. Join Thrive Market today and get 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. Go to thrivemarket.com/whattheworld for 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. That's Thrive, THRIVE, market.com/whattheworld. Thrivemarket.com/what. Chris just seems like a really good family guy, but really the defense, what they were doing in cross-exam was pushing the family narrative. And the defense points out, well, Alex said he never had life insurance on Maggie, and he said no. He also asked, was Alex spending lavishly? He said no. Chris Wilson said he stayed with his two brothers and his in-laws. He never spent a night at Moselle after the murders. And then, so they talk about him knowing Alec for over 30 years. And for 20 of those, Alec claims to have had an opioid addiction. And he was asked, did you notice any change in his behavior? Chris Wilson said, no, nothing erratic, nothing around Maggie or the kids, just nothing at all. And then he's asked, about building up tolerance to painkillers. And Chris Wilson is like, nope, don't know about it. So Maggie and Chris Wilson's wife, Dana, they were sorority sisters at USC. We learned that. They got close at the end of their first year in law school, talking about him and Alec. And they'd all go to USC games. I didn't know this. Alec played for USC, and he got hurt and didn't play. And I think his nickname was Big Red. Somebody texted me that. So they had kids kind of, around the same age, a couple of years apart. And his daughter was very close to Paul. They all grew up together. And in the Ferris case, the clients were happy. And he never saw Alec kind of just snap in high stress situations. He said sometimes it was hard to get him to focus, but that was really normal for him. And he always took a call no matter what was going on. Deposition, he would step out. He kept in touch with Maggie and the kids while he traveled for work, but he said in the last 5 years, there was a lot less travel before the murders. He said Alec didn't do like the guys' weekend to take off and golf. He stayed with his family. And they talked about the family tailgates they would have for the Gamecocks when they would go to Columbia to watch games. He said they'd go to just about every home game. And the weekend before the murders, we know that Chris Wilson went to the regionals with Alec, Maggie, and Buster, and Buster's girlfriend on June the 5th. So Chris met them there Saturday. They went to mutual friend's house, then the game. They kind of split up because they had different seats. But Griffith said, you agree, family first to him. And he said, yes. So they're really just trying to just reiterate to the jury, like, he's a family man. He's not going to kill his family. So Memorial Day weekend, they play that video with the birthday party, Paul carrying the cake. And it's interesting, though, because Chris Wilson referred to the Edisto house as Maggie's home, not Alec and Maggie. And actually today I met one of their neighbors for about 10 years who I talked to for about an hour. Very nice guy. Had a lot of things to say, but not confirmed. So we'll just pass. So yeah, you see that at the end of that Memorial Day video, Chris Wilson gives Alec a big hug from behind. And so Memorial Day weekend, now I'm going to tell you at this point, the jurors were starting to look bored. The next weekend was so you had Memorial Day weekend. The next weekend was the baseball tournament. And then, you have the murders. And then they talk about Randolph being loved by a lot of people. He said yes. So also one thing about the Ferris case with the Mack truck is only the second reported case in the world of that happening. And they were worried they wouldn't win punitive because it's such a rarity that this happens. So on June the 7th, the day of the murders, he did not talk to Alec earlier that day. And but if you remember, he needed to talk to him about inspecting that machinery. And so the last couple of things, the defense points out that the cell service is terrible at Moselle, and Chris said he would drop calls there a lot. So they go through the timeline of calls, like the last one being 14 minutes before the 911 call. That was Alec to the text from Alec to Chris, call me if you wake up. And then at 9:52, Chris calls Alec back. And anyways, there were some time discrepancies between the Verizon bill and what they found. And I don't think any of that matters, honestly. So then Chris Wilson talks about him being in a white shirt when he got to Moselle the night of the murders. He does not remember seeing Sled take his clothes, and he did not change his clothes while Chris Wilson was there. And he said he really wasn't paying attention. He said, I'm focused on my friend. He was destroyed, quiet, crying, gracious to people who were there. And then it goes into he never met a stranger. So he said that some of the people there, Ronnie Crosby, who gave some very emotional testimony, Lee Cope, Randy, John Marvin, and Buster came right after him that night after the murders. The next morning, the same people were there, and they talked about how everybody there agreed Alex should not talk to law enforcement without an attorney present. And Chris Wilson said, he doesn't need to talk to Sled alone with his frame of mind. Someone needs to be there. And he said, we're all lawyers. Lawyers advise do not interact without an attorney there or without an attorney's permission. Chris felt, he just wasn't all there mentally to talk to Sled. And he said that, he agreed that they all made the right call. So the defense says you told the grand jury he wasn't in the right state of mind and said, we all didn't need to be his lawyer. I wanted to be his friend. So after the murders, he stayed with John Marvin, Randy, and he and Buster would go to Edisto or with Maggie's parents, but again, never stayed at Moselle. He said he didn't know what he was going to do without Maggie and Paul. Paul loved that property, and Alec mentioned that he and Buster may sell it. And the defense asked Buster and his girlfriend Brooklyn to stand up, and it was super awkward. And I don't know why, but there's been some things in the news that apparently there was a book passed off to Alec. I've read a couple of different versions of what was passed off, but something was handed to Alec, and apparently that's why the family's been moved to the back row. And but I think that the defense was not happy they were moved to the back row, but it was so awkward when they asked Buster and his girlfriend to stand up. I kind of watched their faces, and they were like, okay. So anyways, redirect, you hadn't been asked to cover the $192,000 at that time, talking about the night of the murders. And he said it wasn't until July. So Waters says, before June 7th, you talked to Lee Cope. And he said, yeah, he asked if Ferris money had been dispersed. And did you tell Cope you had already dispersed the fees to Alec? And he said no. So on the night of the murders, he points out that Alec called him first. You raised the issue of the equipment, and Chris said, yeah, I keep up with deadlines. So Creighton Waters, the prosecutor, did you know he didn't go to see Randolph that day? I guess the day that the law firm approached him about this. And so he said, I don't know if he said he did or not. And he talked about him sounding normal, no sign of opioid problems. His clients trusted him. There are some objections thrown in there. He said Alec was good at spotting issues with cases and good when he could focus. It sounded like Alec, like me. I was very late diagnosed, like last year with ADD, and I'm telling you, medication's a game changer. Because I used to be like that. You couldn't get me to sit still for nothing. But yeah, I mean, 20 years. He stole from his client and his firm. And were you his best friend? Did you know? And he said, Lee Cope told me on September 13th, the first time I ever heard it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. So after lunch, there is a little issue where Harpootlian does not want to call Tony Satterfield because he is a victim. And he said that bringing in the financial crimes is for limited purposes and his testimony would be more prejudicial than probative. But look, I mean, it's let's just put it this way. Tony came on the stand and did a bang up job. And I'm going to tell you, Eric Bland, they look like father and son. That little reassuring hug he gave Tony before he went on the stand just touched a lot of hearts, including people in the jury. And I'm going to tell you, this testimony, I think, is devastating for the defense. I don't know. Look, I know it's for supporting the motive, but jurors are human. And the more they hear about what they perceive as a very rich man taking advantage of very vulnerable people, it kind of lines up with, well, if he could do that to Tony Satterfield, could he kill his kids? I don't, or his wife and son. It's just, there's so much financials, y'all, and it's getting lost. But Tony Satterfield, to me, they could have put him up there, him be the only witness, and bam, you got your financials in, because that's really as low as you can go with what happened here with the Satterfield boys. Thank God Eric Bland took care of them. So they just go back through it. Alex said, hey, I'm going to take care of you boys. I'm going to file a lawsuit. We're going to file a lawsuit. And he said, I'll get you boys $100,000 a piece and pay the medical bills. He said he saw Alec as his lawyer, met with him, told him any paperwork or bills to please send those to him, and he would take care of it. And he agreed to let Alec move on with the case. So they show a cover sheet, and it's handwritten by Tony, and it's about medical bills and the trailer company, his mom's trailer. I believe there was a risk of them being evicted. But when he met with Alec, he signed paperwork and became the executor of the estate. He explained why his brother was not put as executor, and he said because he's a vulnerable adult and he can't be. So Alec wanted to involve Corey Fleming, and he said it would be a conflict of interest for him personally. So he met Corey Fleming once or twice, and he would call Alec, though, with any questions he had. And Alec said to let someone else be his personal representative. So Tony agreed. I mean, Tony has no idea about how these lawyers are working. And so he's just trusting Alec. And I think that was so damaging, because I'm going to tell you, when Tony was testifying, some of these jury members were giving Alec like the laser eyes. If looks could kill, bam. I mean, it was, this was very influential, I think, to the jury. So ultimately it was, he was not aware at this time that there were any funds received. $505,000. Nope. Never told of any recovery of funds. And then, of course, we found out later on through family who had seen it in the media. Never paid him a dime. Right. So then, they say, hey, he never told you about the $5 million umbrella policy with a recovery of $3.8 million. He's like, nope. He would talk to Alec about every 3 to 4 months. It was always, we're making progress. This is difficult. It's a hard case. And so there are some texts from April 12th of 21 that wasn't included in the previous testimony, but came to light after he testified. Hey man, checking in, working on case, checking in on you, whatever. That was from Alec. And Tony says, hey, doing good. How's the case going? How are you? It really, just, it's just like putting a pacifier in almost. Like if I just stay in touch and let them know I'm working on the case, then I can keep going. But I mean, Creighton Waters made clear, never paid those boys a penny. And I mean, the jury just stared Alec down at times. So there's a couple of messages, there's movement, still a ways to go. Hope to see you soon. Tony says, cool, thanks. He said they would talk on the phone or text maybe 3 to 4 times a year again. So Tony got word the settlement was reached. He saw the media. He reached out to Alec actually after the murders, he thinks. And I'm going to tell you so they got a new attorney, Mark Tinsley, who represented Mallory Beach's family and was the last witness of the day, but he sent them to Eric Bland. And Alec admitted to stealing their settlement. And so they filed a claim against Alec to get the money. And the total that Alec got from the Satterfield case himself personally was $4.3 million. That was $3.8 million and then the $505,000. And he said, why did you agree to let Alec help? And Tony says, I trusted him. And I'm going to tell you, and that jury went right to Alec. Bad Testimony. Cross-exam, man, I'm going to tell you, Harpootlian did not win any points with the jury. He says, you sued him. Your lawyer was Corey Fleming. And Tony said they were really a team. And then he says Chad Westendorf, who was the personal representative, is with a bank. And he says, yes. So he said, it's his job to be sure you got your money. So it's almost like he's throwing Chad under the bus, but Chad didn't steal the money. Alec did. And then Harpootlian has some line with Tony where he's like asking him something. And he's like, oh, no, but yeah, you're not a lawyer. I thought it was very demeaning and talked down to him. And people in behind me made audible noises when this line of question. At first, it was hard to hear because he was talking very, very low. Harpootlian was. He said, Alec admitted he owed you $4.3 million, but you hired Eric Bland and he sued the firm and others. And you got over $6.5 million, a couple of million more than what Alec took. Like, okay, what are you getting at? What's your point, dude? I mean, look at what he did. I mean, the jury was not appreciating this line of questioning, and they took well to Tony. And Tony left pretty shortly after his testimony, and every member of that jury watched him walk out. And, several of them just had a very faint smile on their face, like, good for you, dude. So the next witness is from Palmetto State Bank. He just goes through how Russell Lafitte was feeding Alec when he was overdrafted. One thing that really hit the jury hard with that was when they talked about an overdraft that Alec had and the fee for that overdraft, $5. Now, here's the thing. People in there, it was almost like you were watching a sitcom because everybody behind me that was like public laughed, and a couple of members of the jury laughed out loud because here's the thing. If you're just like not rich, you get these overdraft $25, $35, and then it puts you further in the hole. And you got this dude that's got like so much money coming in and out, and God knows where it is, a $5 overdraft fee. But ultimately, in August of 2021, the bank determined that he owed them $4.2 million. That's crazy. So I'm not going to go through all this testimony again with him. It just, the bank was left holding the bag. And they talked about the Edisto loan that had matured. The bank and the bar essentially get together and decide if they're going to renew or pay off that loan. And there was an appraiser in April of 2021 sought on that Edisto house. So they go through the bank accounts that he had and the balances. So there was a farm account as of the date of the murder that was in the negative $2,400. There was another account that was in the positive $2,100. There was a health savings account for $7,540, but that's limited to medical expense use. So he couldn't really touch that. There was an account, though, in his name that had $62,115. And then there was an account for Maggie that on June 24th had a $23.97 balance. So, it's a lot of financials, y'all. But then on cross, he said Alec could have walked in the bank the day of the murders and got a loan because at the time he wasn't under any scrutiny. And then Creighton Waters finishes with having this witness just say, yeah, I mean, when all the crap hit the fan, we were left with the loans. Tinsley, we heard from him recently too. He testifies that, again, Mallory's family tried to go down to the scene and were held back to where Maggie and Randolph come. They lift the tape. They're allowed to go. And the Beach family was concerned about a cover-up, really, as was pretty much everybody that knew the Murdaugh family. I think there was an objection with that was sustained, by the way. He reiterates the hunting insurance policy Alec had wouldn't cover him. And then the $4.3 million in coverage that he had, it was depleted from the Satterfield case. So that life insurance from Progressive, we know, was $500,000. They offered that immediately. But here's the interesting thing. Paul would have got a cut of that too, because he was a survivor of the crash, even though allegedly he caused it. And then just a couple of little things. He said lawyers are the biggest gossips in the world. Everybody knows what everybody's doing. And that was kind of it for Tinsley. And so Cross tomorrow is going to be lit with maybe this about the GoFundMe donation coming in. But, I even debated doing an episode tonight because it's all very repetitive. But I think it's important to just keep the timeline going with how the trial unfolds just in the future. Sometimes I like to go back and figure out like what day did this happen. And so I can find out. And then two, for people that come in way later, they know at what point this repetitive testimony came in and how it came in. And there are some different little things in this testimony we didn't hear when it originally was put forth without the jury present. But tomorrow we still have direct. Tinsley is still on direct. Cousin Eddie, I'm telling you, we're hearing a lot of different stories. We're hearing that the prosecution maybe isn't going to put him up. I've heard the defense will put him up. Don't know what's fact or fiction. We shall see. But tomorrow might be the day if they do put him up. So I'm waiting on that, as is everybody else in that courtroom. That's what we're all talking about, is when his cousin Eddie. And how will that work out for the state if they put him up? Because the cross-exam could be pretty bad. So I don't know. But then again, this is so convoluted. Do you guys ever just follow cases? And then when you really sit back and think about everything that's happened, like Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell's like that for me, or the murder of the Rodens and Hannah Hazel Gilley by the Wagner family, you take inventory of these absolutely just convoluted cases and go, holy crap, like how do people do this? Like, how do they get to this point? And then you think about defrauding vulnerable people. It's not murder, but in its own right, it's terrible. And he did this for so long. And then you just hear, and I've heard from people that knew him personally, how great of a guy he was. It just goes to show, man, you never really know people, do you? No matter how good you think you do. And that's a scary thing. So anyways, all right, guys, I'm out. I'm going to pack my car tonight because after court tomorrow, I'm heading to the Greenville. And then you guys will get tomorrow's testimony Saturday morning so I can go hug my family and spend some time with them tomorrow night. I've missed them a ton this week, like a lot. But again, another amazing week of learning how to do this on location and meeting new friends, and just what a great group of media down here, by the way. Can I just say, like, every single person down here, friendly, fun to be with, willing to talk about whatever, just a really cool atmosphere, I have to say. So anyways, we'll see you Saturday morning. Hope you have a good one.